Hi, it's attorney Richard Hastings, and welcome to the first episode of Justice in Scrubs. We have a very exciting program today where we will be talking about adult children caring for their elderly parents, the do's, the don'ts, things to watch out for, and things that you can do to assist them. So grab a pen, sit down, take some notes, and enjoy the show. Before we dive in, it's important to remember that the information we provide is for informational purposes only. Every situation is unique, and decisions regarding your health or legal matters should be made after consulting with your own doctor or lawyer. Our aim is to inform and empower, but personal circumstances require personalized advice. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, findagreatattorney.com. If you or a loved one has been injured in an accident, finding the right lawyer can make all the difference in getting the compensation and support you deserve. That's where findagreatattorney.com comes in. They are a free lawyer referral service that connects accident and injury victims with some of the best attorneys in their area. With findagreatattorney.com, you can be confident that you'll be getting a highly qualified and experienced lawyer who will fight for you. The best part? Their service is completely free, so you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. If you're in need of legal assistance, head over to findagreatattorney.com and let them help find you one of the best lawyers for your case. So sit back and enjoy the show. So, Jeff, welcome to Connecticut, and particularly Ridgefield. I know you came up from the city, and I trust you had a good drive on this glorious day.
It was a beautiful day, a lot of traffic, but we got here.
Good. As you know, I'm very, very excited to talk about this subject, which is of great interest to a large number of people. And one of the statistics that I've heard is that there are 10,000 people a day that turn 65, which is staggering.
Wow.
And the other thing is that the people that are turning 65 and that are older sometimes have parents that are still alive. And one of the issues that adult children of our generation have is caring for their elderly patients, or for their elderly clients. Caring for their elderly parents. So what we want to talk about is what are some things that you can do to help care for your elderly parent, and how can you make things better for everyone concerned?
Yeah, I think that what we want to talk about today is how to keep our elderly parents safe and happy. A lot of people focus on being safe, right? And they throw all this stuff at them, all this technology at them to be safe. But you got to remember, this is a person, and you want to make the person happy also. So I think the best way to introduce this story is with a story. I want to talk about one of my patients, Joe. At the time, Joe was in his late 80s, and he was very proud of the fact that he was very busy and very independent. Every morning he would go to the diner, drive to the diner, and see his buddies, and then he would come home and he would read about history. He loved to read about history. And in the afternoon was the big time for him. He would see his granddaughter, and he would pick her up from school and bring her to soccer practice. He loved watching Lana play soccer. And then one day, he drove Alana home, and she ran into the house crying to her mother, Mary. So Mary said, "What's wrong?" And Alana says, "Grandpa is driving crazy. I thought I was going to get hurt. I never want to go in his car again." And Mary said, "Okay, don't worry about it. We will take care of it." You want to ask questions?
Sure. So, what's interesting is I had told you before that my dad passed away about a year and a half ago, but one of the biggest challenges that we had with my father, and the same thing as with Joe, he was very independent. And one of the ways you show your independence is by driving where you want to go when you want to go there. And my father would rent new cars every 3 years. And we noticed that he had just signed a new lease for a car, which we were not happy about. And the car was dinged and banged and scraped. And one day I visited him at his condo, and he lived by himself, and you could see the sides of the garage was scraped. So obviously there was a concern with my father and his driving, and as you get older, as you well know, you're not as able to turn and to stretch.
You say I'm old?
Do all these different things. So that was a real concern of ours. So
Sure.
One of the questions that we had as a family, and I have 4 brothers, is how do you have this conversation with your parent, which in effect strips them of their independence, and that is you take their driving privileges away.
Yeah, let's talk about the conversation. The conversation is a difficult one, and when should you have the conversation? Usually you have that conversation when something happens. Joe is driving poorly, a parent can fall, get hurt themselves, or you notice there's a problem. So usually it happens when something bad happens or
Right.
something happens. A couple of things you might want to do is you might want to look out for some of the things that might show that the parent is getting older.
For example?
For example, like grooming. They used to be dressed perfectly and now they're missing when they're shaving, or falling is a big thing. If they start falling, or their house is unkept. A house used to be fairly nice and now it's a disaster. Or they can't keep up with everyday chores like mail or bills. They're starting to get collection notices. So that's when you need to start the conversation. And hopefully you start it before something bad happens. You don't want to wait till they fall and break their hip or something like that.
And it's funny you should mention that, because these were the things that we noticed with my father, where, he was from the generation where you were always dressed impeccably. Whether you were going to the grocery store or you were going to church, wherever you were going, you were always dressed very nicely. And it got to the point where he was wearing sweatpants and sweatshirts, and the sweatshirts would have stains on them from food or coffee. And like you said, he would have little blotches on his face where he would miss shaving. And his condominium was not as clean as it used to be. And the dishes were put back and they weren't washed particularly well. So you see that gradual kind of slide into this arena that you're talking about, where there needs to be some type of attention and a discussion. With all that being said, here was the difficult thing that we experienced, and I'm sure most adult children experience, and that is the relationship is such that you're the child. And no matter what you say, your parent sometimes thinks of you as that 5-year-old kid who used to do all these silly things as a child, and they were there to correct you. So when you go to your father, in my example, and say, Dad, I think it's a really bad idea that you continue to drive, they immediately dismiss you. When you talk about the grooming or you talk about the hygiene, and those are difficult conversations to have, they get dismissed as well. Like, oh, don't worry about it. Oh, it's nothing, or I'll be more careful. So those are difficult conversations to really get through to the parent as a child.
Right. So let's talk about the conversation. What should you say? The first thing you should say is, I love you very much, and but we're all getting a little older and you might need some help. But you also need to look at their eyes, not just yours, because you want to see where they're at. You want to ask them questions like, are you okay? You want to empathize with them because they probably see some changes. You want to ask them, can you do everything? Do you need a little more help? They might say, I'm fine. You're crazy. Leave me alone. I'm perfect. Then what you should say is, why don't we go to the doctor? Let the doctor examine you to see if there's any real changes. And that's what Mary did, and that's what you should do, is you should have the patient go to their doctor, because the doctor might find some things that are helpful. And the best thing is the doctor might find that they're not taking their medicines properly. The number one cause of elderly decline that's reversible is medications, because most of them don't take them properly.
So let me ask you this question. So I convinced my father that, it's a good idea to go and see his doctor.
Right.
So I make an appointment with the doctor. So when I call the doctor's office, do I say, I want to take my father in because we're experiencing some elder care issues that I'd like the doctor to address with him?
Yes, you should give the heads up, because then we take over.
Okay. So I take my father, for example, into the doctor, and then could you kind of walk me through the conversation? Am I in the room with him? Are you just in the room with him? How does that work?
Right. It's very important that you're not in the room.
Okay.
It should be a one-on-one, just like the conversation that you had with your father should have been one-on-one, because you don't want to overwhelm them, because they're feeling stuff, but they might not want to admit it, and they're a little nervous about it. You don't want to have the whole gang come. And in the doctor's office, you want it to be one-on-one. Hopefully it's a doctor that knows your father very well.
Right.
In this case, Mary brought Joe to me, and I knew Joe for a long time, so we did have a conversation. And I thanked Mary because Mary brought all the pills, all the medicines. So Mary asked Joe, can I bring the medicines? And you don't want to just bring the medicine. You want to go to the medicine cabinet and get all the medicines. You want to get medicines from the kits they have. And you want to get the lists also. You want to bring everything.
But if I could, let me just go back to the conversation that you're going to have with my father in the doctor's office. So generally, I would think parents are going to downplay whatever challenges they're having. So it doesn't sound like they're going to have their license taken away or they need to engage in dramatic or drastic behavioral changes. So what conversation would you have with the parent?
Well, first I just say, how's it going? Mm-hmm. And in Joe's case, he said, I'm fine. My crazy daughter thinks I'm old. So I said, Joe, you are getting old. And then I would examine him because we need objective data. Because Joe's right. Joe's not going to admit that he's having problems because Joe's very proud. Right?
And what are you looking for during the exam?
So what we do, first of all, we go over the medicines. And we check their blood pressure because 70% of elderly people are on blood pressure medicines.
Wow.
70%. So, and most of the time they're not taking it. So their blood pressure was high. In Joe's case, his blood pressure was high. And then we do a mini mental status exam to quantify their mental state. So in Joe's case, he had some mild memory changes, And then we do what's called a get up and go test, where we actually watch them get up and then we time them. And Joe had some mobility and balance problems. Balance is a big issue. And also, Joe had some bruises, suggestive of falling.
Sure.
And falling is a huge problem. So that's with the exams. And Joe couldn't dispute it. These are objective findings. Mm-hmm. So then I would bring Mary in and we would go over the findings. And the first thing I would say to Joe is, Joe, I'm having trouble. I'm concerned that you're having some mild trouble. And I'm not sure that you should be driving. But let's find out. Let's get you tested by the motor vehicle does it. Driving schools do it. Let's get you tested to see if you can drive. Because driving is a huge responsibility and involves problems. So let's get you tested. Now, if Joe says no, then I would take the keys away. But
when you say take the keys away, what does that mean?
I would say, Joe, you're not driving anymore. Give me the keys. Because, we try not to do that. We can do that. We would call a motor vehicle and we'd tell them that he's not capable of driving anymore. And we would, in a sense, take the keys away. I've only done that once, or maybe twice in my 30-year career. Usually we like to have them get tested. And usually they agree. And then they understand if they fail, they're not driving anymore.
And just I wanted to interject on the side of legal cases, and that is we've had a number of cases where elderly drivers have sometimes seriously hurt individuals. In one case, a man was pulling into a parking lot. He thought that his car was in forward when it in fact was in reverse. He hits the gas and then just knocks this woman to the ground. Other cases where they think they're hitting the brake and they hit the gas pedal and cause an accident. Some of them deal with depth perception. Some of them deal with lack of adequate, time to brake or to turn or to sense something. So there are lots of challenges that can result from this. And, the last thing you want your elderly parent doing is, God forbid, killing somebody else or seriously injuring somebody else or doing something to the parent themselves. And so it's important from a societal standpoint that adult children take their parents into the doctor when these things start to evidence themselves.
Right, but you also don't want to isolate your parents. And once you take the keys away or don't allow them to drive anymore, you got to make sure that they continue to socialize. Because socialization is very important to stop the progression of aging. Socialization is the number one thing. So you got to really make sure that they're still doing their stuff. And in Mary's case, what Mary did was she, instead of them all meeting in the morning in the diner, she set up a Zoom call.
Wow.
And they initially barked at it. Initially they didn't like it. But then they
initially meaning the elderly people.
Yeah. But you know what was really funny? When Mary set it up, all of Grandpa's friends' children called Mary and said, "Thank God you did this, because we had the same concern. We were afraid. We were afraid to address this." So this conversation is very important. And don't be afraid to address it, because you don't want to wait until something bad happens, because unfortunately something bad usually happens. Car accident, broken hip. But you want to do this before. Once you start seeing the signs of deterioration, then you really want to have the conversation.
So I wanted to go back to something you had said earlier, which I find fascinating, and that is, we just assume that when our parents are on prescription medication, that they're taking their medication. But many times, as you have pointed out, they don't take it on a regular basis.
Most of them don't.
And if you don't take your medicine on a regular basis, it creates all kinds of challenges. So, for example, you had said that most elderly people don't take their high blood pressure medication. So when you have high blood pressure, what challenges does that create?
Well, blood pressure, your heart is now pumping against increased pressure. So the heart doesn't like that. It starts failing. And then it can cause embolism, or breaking off little things to the brain. And that can cause memory problems. We call it multi-infarct dementia.
And strokes.
And strokes, yes. It causes a lot of bad things. It can affect the kidneys. It can affect the arteries in your legs. It can affect your heart. It can affect your brain. It can do really bad things.
So what are the best ways that an adult child can monitor their parents' prescription medication usage?
Well, you should take it over. If you start seeing signs of deterioration, you should take it over. In other words, you should once a week come to the house and set up the pill boxes. You should deal with the pharmacy and make sure they're getting the medicines properly. And nowadays you can do it online, so you don't even have to go to the pharmacy. Because once they're starting to have decline, you need to take over the medicine, because they cannot handle it.
So the suggestion is then the adult child goes to CVS, for example, picks up their medicine once a month or once every other month, and then literally comes over once a week and fills up the pill.
Absolutely.
The pill container, and then make sure that they're taken every single day.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, what some people do is they have the grandchildren call, because, Grandpa loves to hear from the grandchildren, right? And the grandchildren call and say, "Did you take your medicine, Grandpa?" And they'll listen to the grandchildren more than they'll listen to you.
Great idea.
Yeah. And the grandchildren love to do that. So, get the grandchildren involved. That really, really helps.
We want to take a quick break to remind you about our sponsor, findagreatattorney.com. Dealing with the aftermath of an accident or injury can be overwhelming. And the last thing you want to worry about is finding the right lawyer. Findagreatattorney.com simplifies the process by connecting you with one of the top attorneys in your area who specializes in your specific type of case. Whether you've been injured in a car accident, suffered a slip and fall, or experienced medical malpractice, Findagreatattorney.com has a network of experienced lawyers ready to help. And remember, their service is completely free, so you can focus on your recovery without worrying about the cost of legal representation. If you or someone you know needs legal assistance, don't hesitate to visit findagreatattorney.com and let them match you with one of the best lawyers in your area. Okay, so let's talk about, that's a great way. So let's go back to independence for the elderly adult. So what are some of the things that the elderly adult can do, or the adult child can do, to make sure that their parent is still socializing?
Right. So the computer is huge, and you'd be surprised how well the elderly patients take up the computer. There might be some resistance initially, but like Joe, in Joe's case, he started connecting with his friends and family that he hasn't connected with in a long time through the computer. He started downloading audiobooks to read about history. So I would really suggest that use that computer. And then Mary took Joe to physical therapy because Joe was falling, and I recommended that he goes to physical therapy for his balance issues. And Mary and Joe would do the physical therapy exercises over Zoom. So you really have to embrace the computer. Now, if your parents don't want to do that at all, then there are community services that you can do, and they'll pick your parents up and they'll bring them to they call it adult daycare, and they like that. They play cards, they have shows, they do things there. So if your parents really can't handle the computer at all, I would recommend using community services, and every community has these daycares.
Right, and the local communities here have senior centers.
Right.
Where they have either luncheons or bingo or, these activities. It's almost like going to summer camp, where it's all fun and games, which gets them out of the house, which gets them to interact with other people. They meet new friends, they have a new friend group, and they engage in activities that stimulate their brain.
Right. You got to continue the socialization. Socialization and continued learning is felt to be the best way to stop the progression of aging.
Makes sense.
And continuing learning is great on the computer. There's these online university classes. There's amazing things on the computer. And if you can't do it on the computer, then I would go to these senior centers. Continuing learning, socialization, huge.
So we've dealt with the driving issue. We've dealt with the medication issue. Let's talk about issues as far as keeping your parents safe at home. What are some of the things that we can do there?
Right. Thank you for bringing that up. So there are a lot of things you can do. The first thing I would do is I would take care of the outside of the house. The walkway should be lit with motion detectors. The few steps, most houses have a few steps to go into the door. Those are dangerous, especially at night. So if they're visiting their friends and they're coming home, that needs to be lit. It needs to be lit with motion detectors. Mm-hmm. And you probably get a doorbell camera because there's some bad people out there. And you want to know who is knocking on that door. I mean, nowadays people don't usually knock on the door as much as they used to. But still, you want to make sure. So doorbell cameras are really cheap and they're easy to put in, like $40 or something like that. I would get a doorbell camera and motion detectors outside.
And then I think the other thing is, we represent lots of people that trip and fall. And I think it's important that, whether it's the adult child or it's a contractor, that they come over the house and look at different things. So if there are steps that are not level, right, or if there are potholes, or if there are, curbs that are too high, all of those things have to be looked at because, as you well know, once an elderly person falls, it creates a very, very serious challenge.
Right, downhill, yes.
So it's almost like from an engineering standpoint that you have somebody come over, almost like a safety engineer, to look at everything that is around the outside, first of all, that might create a hazard. I mean, if there's a hose and the hose gets left out on the walkway, or if they're, like I said, uneven walking surfaces, or in the snow and ice, slippery walking surfaces, or unlit surfaces, all of those have to be taken care of to make this as safe as possible for the elderly parent.
That's a great point. Then let's go inside. Let's look at the kitchen. Now, most of these elderly people at this stage are not doing a lot of cooking, right? So you probably want them, if you can convince them not to use the stove. The stove is a dangerous place because they forget to turn it off. And nowadays you can use toaster ovens, microwaves, air fryers, all these things to do it. And they're probably not doing any original cooking. You're probably bringing the food over there and they're just heating it up. So I would convince them not to use the stove. And they have these covers that you can put on the stove knobs because they really shouldn't be touching the stove. Also, no ladders, no step stools. Throw them out. Get them out of there because they will use them and they're going to fall. So they should not be using step stools or ladders. Also, all the stuff that they need should be easily accessible. You don't want them to reach or look going up or things like that because they can fall.
So I think it's probably important that you have this conversation with your parent to say, listen, we need to remove these step ladders. We need to remove anything that creates an opportunity for you to climb on it and then later fall. So instead of just taking these things out and then having your elderly father, get a kitchen chair and bring it over to the cabinet and stand up on the chair and fall,
Right.
That's another horrible situation.
Right. So that's a great point. You want to empathize with what their need. You want to listen to them. You don't want to impose stuff on them because once you impose stuff on them, they're not going to listen. You want to involve them in the conversation.
You want buy-in.
Yes, buy-in. Right. Perfect. And let's talk about the bathroom because the bathroom is a dangerous place.
Wait, can I just go back to the kitchen? So, obviously a parent can reach up to a certain level in the cabinets. So I think what you suggested is that all of the dishes, all of the food products, anything they need to use is on that cabinet and there's nothing above it because they shouldn't be going above that one particular height.
Absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that. Absolutely. They shouldn't be going up there. No.
And then I guess the other thing is, do they really need access to sharp knives or things that spin or twirl or, blenders or things like that? Do they really need to be using those? And are they a safety risk to them?
They're all safety risks. And yes, that's a great point. You should just minimize the stuff that they need in the kitchen, throw everything else out.
So I think it's almost like you're the parent of a small child and you look around your kitchen to see what do you not want your small child touching.
Great analogy.
And anything that's got those spinning or twirling things or pieces or moving parts, cutting bagels, things like that. I just think you say to your parent, listen, God forbid you have some type of an accident, then you're not going to be able to meet with your friends. My father played golf all the time, or you won't be able to play golf. You make it something really tangible for them so they're mindful of the fact that I can't do that.
Right, get buy-in. Like you said, get buy-in. So now can we go to the bathroom?
Let's go to the bathroom.
Okay, so the bathroom is a dangerous place. So first thing you want to do is raise the toilet. They have these toilet seats. Some of them have bars on them, so it's easy to get down.
Now, when you say raise the toilet, those plastic commode tops?
Yes.
And why do you want to raise that?
Because they have trouble getting up. And they fall a lot off the toilet. So you want to definitely raise that. Mm-hmm. And if they're having trouble getting up, then they have these plastic things with bars, or you can put bars on the walls or something. But you should have some sort of hand bars to help them. The bathtub. You should look at the bathtub. If the bathtub's really high, you got to make sure they can get in the bathtub properly. They're not step stools, but they have these little things for the bathtub that you can put in so they can step onto the bathtub easily. Those are the two things, the bathtub and the toilet. And also reaching again. All this stuff, all the stuff they need should be at arm's length.
Right. So, other cases that we've had in our office, people go to hotels as guests, and then they slip and fall in the shower. So what is the best thing to do for the surface of the shower to reduce a slipping hazard?
Right. First of all, there should be rails, hand rails to help them. And also they have these anti-slipping stuff that you can put in the showers. Very important.
And then lighting, of course, very important.
Right.
Okay.
So you want to go to you want to go to the living room? We'll go to the living room. Rugs. Do they really need area rugs?
I would think not because they're so dangerous.
They are very dangerous. I would get rid of the area rugs if possible. And also the cords, the electrical cords. Make sure they're secured against the wall. They're not out because they fall on the rugs, they fall on the cords. So do that. You also want to consider cameras. Now, when you don't want to just show up with a camera and put it up. You got to talk to your parents about that. Don't impose stuff on them. Say, what can we? Is it okay if we have a camera? Because if you fall this way, you can just yell out and talk to me. Mm-hmm. Cameras are very important. I wouldn't put them in the bedroom, but I would definitely put them in the living room. Also, because they're falling, they need to have something that they can call out. They can use one of those things where you push the button.
Help, I've fallen and I can't get up.
Right, the necklaces. But they don't usually like the necklaces because they feel it's like a dog collar. And also the necklaces, make them look old and feeble. Even though they are old and feeble, they don't want to look like it. So they have these watches now that are just as good, and it gives you a lot of information. They're especially watches for the elderly. So I would highly recommend they all have a watch or some way of communicating to you when they're falling. Very important. And let's go to the bedroom.
Well, let me just,
Sure.
when you're talking about the fob or the watch, I think probably it's also very important that there be some kind of check-in system
Yes.
with family members. So if you don't hear from rather than finding out, God forbid, your father or mother fell during the night and you don't get in touch with them until 6 o'clock the next night and they've been on the ground the whole time, there should probably be some kind of check-in system, I would think.
Yeah, if you have enough people to do that, that was a great suggestion. Maybe someone do a schedule, and every 4 to 6 hours, someone's checking in on them. Now, you don't have to call them all the time, because if you have these cameras or something, you can check in that way remotely, or phone calls fine too.
Especially like you were saying with the grandkids. I mean, it's a great way to check in with your elderly parent and to have an interaction between your child, the grandchild, and their grandparent.
Right. There's nothing grandparents like more than speaking to their grandkids. And I'm a grandfather. It's amazing. It's God's gift to the world. So, yes.
You can load them up with sugar, with coffee, with whatever you want to do and just send them on their way.
Right. Grandchildren are the greatest things in the world. You agree? You have a couple of them? Or
I have one, yes.
Yes. Okay. So can we go to the bedroom now?
Yes.
Okay. So the bedroom, there's a couple.
I don't like the way you said that, but yes.
So there's a couple of things you should do in the bedroom. First of all, if the bed's too high and they can't get in or out easily, you need to take care of that. So you should watch them or ask them, can you get into the bed properly? And also, their cell phones or whatever they have, you got to make sure that the chargers are right there at the bedside, and they should have a night light. I don't think there should be any cameras in the bedroom, but there should be night lights, chargers, and take care of the bed and make sure it's not too high.
And I think, going back to the point you made earlier about checking in, if you don't see your parent in the living room on that camera within X number of hours, assuming it's a time when you should be seeing them, I think that's a red flag for there could be a problem.
Great point. And we should talk about the stairs. Now, you probably don't want them walking up the stairs at all. So if you can set up the bedroom downstairs, that would be fantastic. But unfortunately, sometimes you can't do that. You have a small apartment and you can't have a bedroom downstairs. So you should watch them walk upstairs. If they can't walk upstairs, they have these chair lifts. They're not expensive, they're easy to put in, and they actually like that. So we've had a lot of patients use that. So you should look at the chair lifts if they can't walk up the stairs. You really got to look at the stairs. Now, a simple thing you can do with the stairs is you can have rails on both sides, because one side is not enough. You need the rails on both sides. But make sure you watch them walk up the stairs. Stairs are dangerous.
But I think the point you made earlier, which is a huge point, is, even if you have to convert a room downstairs on the main level to a bedroom, it's a good idea to do that, because I have friends of mine that have elderly parents, and occasionally one of them will fall down the stairs, and that's like the beginning of the end.
Oh my God, yes.
So, think about your parent. They're thirsty in the middle of the night and they get up to go downstairs to get something to drink. That's a recipe for disaster.
Right.
So to be able to convince your parent that they need to sleep on the main floor, and even if you have to set up a bed in the living room or something, the chances of them getting injured that way are significantly less.
Yes. Bedroom on the first floor. You right?
Yes. Thank you, doctor.
Sure. Bedroom on the first floor is huge. Absolutely. Yes. So do you want to talk about the financial safety now?
Actually, why don't we talk about general safety measures like smoke detectors, carbon dioxide detectors, things like that, things they should have. And perhaps having those motion detector lights inside the house. So once they walk in the house, the light in the living room comes on, or something that they don't have to worry about walking through the dark to get someplace.
Yeah, and they have a whole bunch of devices nowadays to do that. And they can just clap their hands and turn the lights on, or they can say, turn the lights on, Alexa, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you should really look at that.
Okay. So before financial safety, why don't we talk about nutrition, meal prep, making sure they're eating properly, make sure they're hydrated. What are some things we can do as adult children to assist in this?
Yeah, so most communities have Meals on Wheels, and you should really look at that. Meals on Wheels are incredibly helpful, and they're usually funded by the local community. So Meals on Wheels, definitely look at.
And that's where they actually deliver food to the home. Do they deliver it on a daily basis, or do they deliver like a week's worth of food?
Every town is different, but I think it's every other day they drop something off.
Great idea.
And Meals on Wheels is great. Obviously, you're probably bringing them some food. And they're not probably going to eat properly. So it's important to bring them food. And you should bring them what they like, because you don't really care if they gain a few pounds. You don't want them to gain 30 pounds, but you don't want them to be underweight, because when they're underweight, there's an increased fall risk. So you want to make sure they have what they like also, because if they're not going to eat it if they don't like it. They should be drinking quite a bit, but so if your grandchildren are calling, you might suggest to them, say, did you have your water today, or did you drink what you're supposed to drink today?
And maybe even have something for them that's a certain size where they're expected to drink that every day.
Or maybe two of them, or one.
Right, whatever it is.
Whatever it is. That's a great suggestion.
So it's funny, my grandmother years ago, she was 99. She was at a convalescent care facility not far from here. And I used to go to visit her, and she would love chocolate. So we would always bring her chocolate. And I was giving her chocolate one day, and the nurse came in and she said to me, she's not supposed to eat chocolate. And I said to her, if she dies from eating chocolate, she'll be very happy. Right. And it was the same thing with my father, where he was at a convalescent care facility, assisted living facility. And I can't tell you how many of the residents there, when you go to dinner, would eat their dessert first.
Absolutely.
It's like... And I mean, drinking alcohol and eating their dessert first, it's almost like anything goes when you get to be that age.
Right. You don't want them to drink too much, but they can definitely have a drink a night. Absolutely.
And he was in hospice care at the end, and the hospice nurse explained everything to me. He can't do this. He shouldn't do that. And I said to her, it's maybe my Catholic guilt, but I have to explain to you. I said, I give him alcohol every night. And she looked at me and she said, I approve of that. I mean, you're at the end of your life. I mean, how many things do you have to take from a person? So, I think it's important, like you said, that they eat properly, but, if they gain a little bit of weight, who cares?
Who cares? That you don't want them to lose weight. Absolutely.
Okay, why don't we talk about financial safety?
Okay, you want to take care of that?
So, I mean, unfortunately, many nefarious people prey on the elderly. And one of the big scams that went around not that long ago is that they would get a telephone call. And the person on the phone would say, this is Sheriff Jones from the Atlanta Police Department. We have your grandson here. And then this young voice would say through the line to the grandfather, Grandpa, I'm in jail. You have to send money. And then they'd give the phone back to the so-called sheriff, who would say, these are the wiring instructions. And there are lots and lots and lots of financial scams. So whenever my father would get a call like this, he would always say immediately, call your uncle, he's a lawyer, or talk to talk to me because he's a lawyer. So he wouldn't deal with that stuff. But it's important, I think, as an adult child to have a conversation with your elderly parent about the fact that there are all kinds of financial scams around there. And if anyone calls or writes to you about money, that you should not engage in a dialogue with that individual, especially if it's online as well. I mean, how many of us have gotten the letters from the Nigerian prince saying that if we just give them our bank account number, we'll get billions of dollars wired into our account? You want them to be aware of these financial scams, so God forbid they don't get, scammed out of all kinds of money. And these things go on all the time. Local police departments put on seminars at the senior citizen centers to tell them about the new scams that are going on. So that's really, really important to have those conversations because, they want to help people, especially their relatives, and they get fooled into thinking that they're helping a family member when in fact they're not.
That's a great point. When they get any phone calls about money, just defer that to your children or defer that to somebody that because they should not be talking about money on the phone at all.
And the other thing perhaps is that, as distasteful as the parent might find it, you have to have the child involved in the parent's finances. So whether you one night a month go over and write checks with them, or talk about their finances, or manage their bills, or see what's going on in their bank account, just so you know that everything is progressing the way it should be and that there are no nefarious characters out there taking their money or doing something with them.
Should you talk to them about all their finances and where everything is?
Right. So that's another point I was going to make. So at some point, your elderly parent is going to die. And at that point in time, you shouldn't have to be engaged in this kind of hunt as to what assets did they have and where were they located, because that becomes very, very difficult. So you should have this conversation with your parent about it's a good idea to have a list of all of your assets. Do you have stocks and bonds? And if so, who's managing those? Do you have a savings account and where is it? Do you have a checking account and where is it? Do you have other investments and where are they? So that when they do pass, it's easier to marshal these assets rather than wondering, do I have everything? And then a lot of people from that generation, especially depression area children, hide cash in the house. So a friend of mine's father died, and we went over the house and found probably $60,000 in cash hidden around the house.
Wow.
So those conversations should be had with the parent to make sure that the child or the children know where the assets are and that they're able to marshal those easier when the time comes. And then again, make sure that they're involved in the day-to-day bill paying process, so their bills are getting paid, number one, and they know that monies aren't going someplace where they shouldn't be going.
Yeah, they can't handle the checkbook right now. At this stage, they can't do it. And they can't pay the bills. So someone needs to take over the bills. Absolutely.
And then there's just so many idiosyncratic things that go on with our elderly parents. So my father was in and out of the hospital a number of times as he was nearing the end of his life. Every single time he went into the hospital, he would say, somebody's got to go home and get the checkbook. And we're like, Dad, you don't have to pay any bills from the hospital. And we're concerned that maybe somebody coming in and out of the room will get your checking account information. You don't need it. But he would almost be insistent that he would need to have his checkbook at the hospital. And so many of our elderly parents have these idiosyncratic habits that they just have to do and have to follow through on and feel uncomfortable. The other thing you would always say is, who's going to go over and get the paper? It's like, Dad, don't worry about that. I need to get the paper. Right. Okay, we'll get the paper.
Right. Do you want to talk about Facebook with your dad towards the end?
Oh, my God. So this was like the most amazing thing that we did for him. So my father was he never went on the computer. He was intrigued with Facebook. The fact that you could connect with people that you physically haven't seen in decades. And I would tell him, I heard from this person. Oh, my God, what's he doing or what's she doing? So as he was nearing the end of his life, he was in hospice care. I put on my Facebook page, my father's nearing the end of his life. And for those of you that knew him and you have a quick little story, I would be indebted to you if you could send a quick note just mentioning that story. And then I intend to read those, entries to him. About 97 very kind people who have known him throughout his life posted something. I went over to where he lived, and every night for about 2 weeks, I would read these to him. It was the greatest gift I could have given him, because every time I talked about someone, he would reminisce about that person and perhaps where they met or what they did together or the kids, or it was such a wonderful way to spend time with him in the later days of his life. And it was just such a nice thing to do. The other thing that we did is there's a book, and I forget the name of the book. It's something about things I've been meaning to ask you, Dad, or things I've been meaning to ask you, Mom. And there are probably 50 different sections about, who was your favorite teacher growing up, and who was your best friend in grammar school, and what was your favorite thing to do, and what was your favorite. You would go through all these questions, and it would cause them to stop and to think, and then to reminisce about whatever it was. And it was just such an amazing way to spend time together. And the most interesting thing for me is I found out things about my father that I never knew. And it's such a great way to spend time with your dad or your mom. And it's something I highly recommend. Let's talk about a number of things that involve legal documents. So as they near the end of their life, they need more and more help with more and more things. So one of the first things you should have is a power of attorney. And a power of attorney allows a person who receives the power to sign legal documents on behalf of that individual. The best thing to do is to have somebody who is physically closest to the elderly parent as the person who's going to be signing, under the power of attorney. So if, for example, in my family, there are 5 boys, it would be the boy closest to where my father physically lives so that things could be done in a much quicker way. So that's one of the first documents that you should have. Another is the healthcare proxy or medical power of attorney, which allows that person to make medical decisions for their parent. Important to have that. And the other thing is the living will or advanced care directive, which basically outlines the parent's wishes as it relates to end-of-life care. So those documents can be prepared by a local attorney at not a very high cost, and it's very, very helpful to do that, especially having a power of attorney. Obviously, an estate plan, a will, perhaps a trust, those things should be prepared as well to make the transition of their wishes known to everybody and to have the transference of assets go from that parent to whatever parties the parent wants to have those.
Great. Thank you for bringing that up. It's very important, those legal documents, and people don't like to talk about it.
And like I said, it's almost, I think in most families, it's a very private issue. Like we're all taught that when you go out and you meet people, you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics, you don't talk about finances. And people of my father's generation don't normally talk about finances. And as a child, you then have to kind of pry into, what assets do you have and where are those assets? And, do those assets have a beneficiary? Because if an asset has a beneficiary, that doesn't pass under your will. So for example, if you have a stock account and you name one person or 5 people, then that asset that's in that stock account passes to those people outside of the will.
Oh, wow.
And the same thing with if you own a property that is a joint tenant with the right of survivorship, that goes to the remaining joint tenant.
Sound like a lawyer.
Well, you have to look at these things. But it's important that as the parent is getting to that point, you have to make sure that all of those legal documents are properly prepared, because inevitably what's going to happen is your parent is going to pass away.
Right.
So we've discussed a lot of great information that adult children can use in dealing with their aging parent. So to kind of wrap things up, what are the things that you'd like to kind of tie a bow on this whole thing about?
Yeah, so first of all, the conversation is difficult, but have it. Because remember, Mary had the conversation with her father, and then all her father's buddies didn't have it with their parent. And all the kids called Mary and thanked Mary. So you got to have that conversation. It's so important, and do it one-on-one. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to discuss everything that night. But first of all, do it over food, because food makes everybody comfortable. And
perhaps alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. Not too much, but yes, a little bit. And then food. Yeah, food is helpful. And it's very important to also understand what they want. Don't impose stuff on them. And the other thing is falling. Falling is caused frequently by balance. And balance can get better. So don't dismiss that. So exercises for physical therapy can improve balance. Balance is very important in the elderly. And the medications. The third thing is the medications. The medications is huge. I can tell you at this point they're not taking their medicines properly. I'd be shocked if they are. So the medications, physical therapy, and the conversation are probably the big take-home messages for today.
So from a child standpoint, the adult child, the other thing we did is in his cell phone, we placed the letters ICE. And most emergency medical care providers know what this means. And ICE in a cell phone means in case of emergency. So what they do is you put ICE and then you put the person that you want to be contacted in case of emergency. So God forbid your parent falls down, they're unconscious. What the emergency medical provider can do is they find that, they push the button, and then it goes to whatever person is designated as that emergency contact. So you can then meet them at the hospital and do what needs to be done.
Great point.
The other thing that's important is that the adult children have a list, which you indicated earlier, of all the medicines that they take.
Yes.
So in case they go to the hospital and they're not able to speak, or many times they don't even know, you know what the medicine is, you know what how many milligrams the prescription is, how often they take it, those different types of things, because that's very, very helpful from a doctor's standpoint to know what they're on.
It's everything. Medicine's everything.
I mean, my father took, it was blood thinner. He took Coumadin.
Oh, my God.
And I think it's important for a doctor to know that a patient is taking Coumadin because of the fact that your blood is so thin.
Absolutely. Medicines are everything.
So I think in wrapping this up, it's important that family members become actively involved in their aging parents' care. And one of the other things that's really important, which you discussed earlier, is socialization. Yes. So having the adult children visit with the parent, or if they're not close enough to call the parent, and if they're local grandchildren, and grandchildren a lot of times are not like, oh, yay, can we go over and visit grandma or grandpa today? You kind of have to say, listen, I would appreciate it if you could go visit your grandmother or go visit your grandfather, and make that a part of everyone's weekly routine. Perhaps, you take them out to dinner once a week, or you take them to church or to some other type of service. If there are other things going on, a movie or a play, or certainly something involving any of their grandkids, that you involve them in those things. Because, if they wake up in the morning and they're looking forward to doing something, it creates this sense of fulfillment.
And FaceTime. FaceTime is wonderful. They love FaceTime. And the grandchildren love to do it also because they love playing with their phones. So I would encourage FaceTime.
And, I love talking with you about these things because you're so insightful, and coming from the medical side of it, you make suggestions and recommendations about things that I think most people wouldn't think about. And when you mention them, it's like, aha, like, oh, of course, or yes. And that's something very, very helpful. So I'm really looking forward to our next episode, and we're going to talk about the 5 leading causes of death in the United States and what you can do to kind of avert being involved in that type of thing.
Sounds great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.